Welcome to Turning Point. I'm your host, Blaine Bertsch, co-founder and CEO at Dryrun cash flow forecasting software, where we help the office of the CFO leave spreadsheets behind, delivering clear and accurate forecasts to the management team. And joining me today is Ken MacKenzie, founder and CEO of Fresh Victor, a premium line of all-natural cocktail mixers. Before launching Fresh Victor, Ken co-founded Republic Tequila and Republic Spirit Blends. His Republic and Amate tequila brands have garnered over 15 top industry accolades, including recognition from Wine Enthusiast magazine and numerous medals at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition and Denver International Spirits Competition. Thanks for joining me, Ken.
My pleasure, Blaine. Thanks so much for having me on.
And, the first thing we do is always dive into a little bit of history on you, and we are going to do that. But I got to tell you before we even start, and if you've watched, we've done like 70 some episodes of this. I really never do this before, almost promotional, but you sent me samples of this. You'll see this is empty. And my wife and I tried this Fresh Victor Mexican lime and agave on the weekend, and we had a little bit of tequila and we mixed it in, and it was delicious. It was amazing. So I am giving you, I'm going to do a little promo right at the start because it was terrific. You guys are doing quality here because it reminded me of, being down here in Scottsdale. We were in a Mexican place over the holidays here, nice little Mexican restaurant. We had some margaritas there, and this was as good easily. And we were really impressed with what was at that restaurant. So I got to jump in and do a little bit of promo. I don't usually do that, but I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing. But before we get to Fresh Victor, which I know is what you're doing now, I want to go all the way back and start talking about where did you get the bug to be an entrepreneur?
Like most things in life, Blaine, it was all about a girl and falling in love. And so I was really fortunate in the sense that I had met my wife here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and she was up here studying English and going to school. And we struck up a friendship first and foremost, and we became inseparable friends. The interesting thing was I always knew that she was leaving and going to go back home to Guadalajara, Mexico. So there was never any intention on my part initially of saying, hey, this is going to turn into something more than a friendship or a pen pal, if you will.
Yeah.
And this would have been in the mid 90s. And when she left, I realized that there was just such a prodigious void in my life, something I just couldn't fill. And as we started talking, I kind of knew right away that this is somebody that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, which is a big jump from, hey, hi friend, to, hey, do you want to spend the rest of our lives together? But luckily for me, and 25 years later, we're together with two daughters. And, when I look back at the mid 90s and how we've built our life together, it was really predicated on that. It was following her back down to Guadalajara and then trying to find a reason to stay. And for me, I was always taught, both in school, and my dad is a retired econ teacher, what are you going to do in the space? And isn't somebody probably doing it better than you can?
Yeah.
And Blaine, that was really frustrating because when you land in Guadalajara and you see all the different things that are down there, everything from, art and jewelry and textiles and food and drink. And, it's just the colors alone are enough to overstimulate the mind. You don't know which direction to head in. And I found myself exactly in that position of what would I do here better than somebody's already doing?
Yeah.
And really luckily for me, I fell backwards into this. Honestly, it wasn't, I wish I could take credit for it and say this was by design or I had this Machiavellian plan. But part of my wife's family was close to the tequila industry and was able to say, hey, in the States, we've really noticed that there's a real disconnect between how we drink here, which is very Epicurean quality, almost, like a high-end spirit in a snifter, versus you guys up in college doing shots of white and gold tequila and talking about some worm that's at the bottom of a tequila bottle when that has nothing to do with tequila. And I just sat and stared because I was guilty of all those things. That's exactly, what happened to me in Northern California. And so my perception of tequila was that of a fun party drink that you want nothing to do with the next day.
Yeah.
And to them, it was the polar opposite. It was, man, you have so much to learn about this. And so very quickly, I'd say within probably a 3 to 6 month period, I began learning as much as I could possibly learn being down there from some of the better master distillers, from some of the better families that had spent generations, honing the craft, both from growing agave as an ingredient to fermentation and distillation and bottling of said tequila. And what I found was most of them were focused on the domestic tequila market in Mexico.
Yeah.
They had made a name for themselves there. Many didn't, especially in the mid-90s, didn't really understand the U.S. vertical market. And what I found was the two cultures were different enough where in Mexico, I was learning very quickly, it's a cash-based society. What can you do for me today?
Yeah.
What are you taking from me immediately? We don't want to see a 5 or 7 year pro forma of how you're going to build this from the ground up and it's going to be the next biggest thing that we've ever seen in our lives, but rather how incrementally or how can you hit benchmarks to show us that this is a relationship?
Yeah.
And that's really, it's so different from tech in that way. I'm a Silicon Valley kid. Mm-hmm. And so tech, it is very much driven on, hey, we're betting that this thing is going to be the next biggest thing that everybody's going to use.
Yeah.
Down there, it's very relationship driven. Do I want to have dinner with you? Do I want to introduce you to my family? Are we going to be exchanging Christmas cards 5 years from now?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because first of all, what dawns on me is how important timing is for innovation and for opportunity. And I think we're almost the same vintage, right? Like we just had our 28th anniversary like a couple weeks ago, right? And
congratulations.
And the mid 90s. Oh, thank you. Mid 90s, being up in Canada, that was you hit the nail on the head of tequilas. Like, honestly, I don't know. I maybe tried it once because my thought was there's a worm in there. Like that was literally I'm like, I ain't having that, right? And we were at least in the mid 90s there, we were starting to look at like Scotch. I was starting to go like, okay, let's maybe not the El Cheapo stuff. Like, is there something a little better? And that timing, I remember that time because it was just in Canada anyway, the very beginnings of craft beer. And that was, I think, almost our little bit of our gateway a bit too, is that, we grew up on, some Molson Canadian Labatt's and maybe Pilsner or whatever. And it started to shift to, oh, what's this dark brown beer from Big Rock? And it was just like, oh, this is different. And then it started to change. And of course, we are all in that age group where it's like, we're not sort of college kids anymore. We're into our first jobs. We're having friends over and we're, having a bottle of wine and you want something better. And for us, I think we started to dip our toe into Scotch. When I started coming down to Arizona, that's when I started to go, oh, wait, this is a little different. They got tequila down here that doesn't seem like, $20 bottle with a worm in the bottom, right? And my biggest introduction to, I think, really interesting tequila was I was going through the airport one time. I'm flying back to Canada and going through Duty Free Americas, and they had this tequila called Gila tequila with a little Gila monster on it. And I was talking with someone that was working in the store, and they said, you don't want this other stuff. Try this one. And it was one that when I researched it after, you could only get it in Mexico or Duty Free Americas. It's the only place you could get it. And I bought, I think, a Reposado and an Aneo, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing those right. I'm not the total tequila guy, but it was totally different. And I took it home and was sharing with friends and our neighbors, and they're like, holy cow, this stuff's amazing and totally different. So anytime any of us were going down to Arizona, we would grab this bottle and bring it back. And it was a complete introduction to us. And it seems like that was like just that timing is like, it's like the world is starting to realize there's quality and craft in these things. And it seems like you hit that timing just bang on, right?
Yeah, and by complete surprise. Like you're not walking into this with your eyes wide open, like, hey, I'm gonna, do something special here. You're really there primarily, or at least for me, I was there primarily because of my wife, and just wanted to spend time with her and her family. And as I was looking for things to do, when you see something that's so disconnected or so misunderstood, and it's so obvious to many that are around you, at first they looked at me like, are you uneducated? Like, how boorish? Like, who raised you? What's going on here? And I thought, we just don't have access to any of this. I haven't seen the things that I'm seeing on a daily basis here. Tell me more. And it really created, Blaine, a working opportunity, because as I learned more and more, I realized that the way that production was done in Mexico and finished out really was almost incomplete, in the sense that they did such an amazing job of making the liquid, bottling it, getting it ready, and exporting it. But once it crossed the border, there wasn't a whole lot of eyes on it. And so, in other words, I had a lot of people saying to me, hey, if we're making a liter of 100% agave tequila, really good tequila, for $1.20, and then we're flying up to San Antonio or San Francisco or Miami, and it's selling for $65 a bottle, that same bottle, who's making all that? What's happening here? What's the disconnect for us? And it was an interesting query, because even early on, it was really apparent that through the exportation process, you had the importer, you had the wholesaler, you had the retailer, you had the customer. And so that vertical was very apparent, and the kinds of people that were really exploiting it at the time were like Sidney Frank with Grey Goose. It was a little ahead of Patron. So you were more seeing some of these big monster brands that were more vodka space, or more, rum or gin, even some whiskeys. But tequila wasn't very, very prevalent yet, as far as having that same recognition. And so that became a real opportunity to create a career of consulting in Guadalajara, and just saying, this is what I know so far. I thought that might last a summer or two. It really turned into 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And my wife, in the meantime, we had gotten married, and she's always been smarter than I am. And she kind of looked at me and said, hey, why are you showing everybody this algebraic formula of A to Z to get to the retail shelf and have the consumer pull it into cart, when we could be doing this ourselves? We could be making tequila with the contacts that you've made and my family's contacts, and actually, beyond producing it, importing it into the States and marketing it. And so that's really kind of how we cut our teeth. Was we started with a couple of importation of somebody else's brands, and then eventually created our own brands. And that was a very rewarding process, because you really saw how everything worked, from planting the agave all the way through to somebody enjoying it at home or in a restaurant.
And it's interesting, because there's a lot of people that would, like you say, they saw this problem, they saw this opportunity, but there's something innate about entrepreneurs, and obviously your wife is highly entrepreneurial as well, where you recognize opportunity. And that's what we see all the time with entrepreneurs. It's like lots of people see it, but it's those ones that kind of recognize the opportunity and go, yeah, no, I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to jump on this thing. Right. So that's such an interesting thing, because we talk with entrepreneurs all the time, and sometimes they start with, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, always entrepreneurial, and they recognize that. And then other times it's, I think innate in them, and suddenly an opportunity comes in front, and you just you go after it. You don't really think about it, you just go after it, right?
I think for me, it was a combination of both. I had always wanted My great grandfather came over from Scotland, and he had an import export company, and so there was a lot of kind of global ization in that. And I was always fascinated by, various countries and their offerings and the such, but had no idea how I was going to, knit that together at all.
Yeah.
And if you were to tell me, I remember telling my folks that, hey, Guadalajara, and they said, Guatemala? What are you talking about? And it was like this girl opportunity, white space to really explore and figure things out. And I made a tremendous amount of mistakes along the way. Like, just through inexperience, just through not realizing how that vertical was actually the construct of the vertical. The only way to really is like, the classroom versus the streets. You can learn a tremendous amount in the classroom about how you should go about approaching something. But once you're there, completely different story. And that's what I found. And it took a while to really figure it out.
It's the typical journey of an entrepreneur is we all make a absolute incredible amount of mistakes, a lot of them close to fatal. And somehow, if you survive long enough, you start to cut down on the mistakes. That's and right. You just sort of stick around, right? And it's there's not like you said, there's a lot of it is you'll have to learn it the hard way. And I never had I never took a business degree or anything like that. I started out as a designer, and and then I got a client or two, and then I started, this is way back in my first business, and then started, selling to people and everything. And then the next thing you know, I'm no longer a designer. Now I'm just running the business, and I got a whole pile of staff and a whole pile of clients. And it's somehow we survived long enough to stick with it, right? And it's kind of the same thing here with Dryrun. It's you learn a lot of stuff the hard way, and you stick with it, right? And somehow we survived it.
And you can't really explain that to somebody on the onset. I remember being in a business course, and they were describing an entrepreneurial effort post-World War II and how the resources were depleted, and this thing didn't work out, and it broke up their marriage, and it was just an awful, you just feel it inside. Yep. And I remember my friend to my right turning to me and saying, what do you want to get for lunch? And you realize the emotional intelligence it really takes to be an entrepreneur, you cannot truly feel that until you go through it yourself.
Yep.
And you're losing something, or you're losing a lot. And it's very typical. That's the other thing. I use that term, the 10-year overnight success, right?
Yeah.
It rings true oftentimes. The main ingredient that I have found that is so important with being an entrepreneur is persistence. You absolutely have to be dedicated to the fact that this is not only not going to be easy, but you're going to get punched pretty hard along the way. And you have to be prepared to say, hey, I'm going to get up the next day with the same level of enthusiasm that I had the day before.
Yeah. It's and I've brought this up in the show before. It was probably quite a number of episodes ago, but I still remember a really good friend of mine, entrepreneur in the tech industry. And during the summer when I'm back up in Canada, we have we sit on the patio, have a beer every once in a while, or we'll meet somewhere. And he walked up one day onto the patio, and he looked at me, and goes, so am I talking you off the ledge, or you talking me? And I'm like,
yeah,
yep, that's exactly it, right? And it's so interesting because all the people I talk with all the time, and you're talking with all sorts of pros and accountants and lawyers and investors and bankers and everything, all of these experts under the sun, and no one is quite the same as talking with another entrepreneur who's been through it, right? And is going through it. And it's so critical, I think, to have that community, because it is really a challenge. And it's like you said, it's the 10-year overnight success. That's sometimes it's 20. Very rarely is it 3 or 5, right? Very rarely. Those are the ones the public hears about. it's very, very rare. And it's, so how did you, so you kind of came up with this idea, but I actually want to go into like, okay, how did you actually get this thing off the ground? How did you get the first customer to pick you guys up? How did you fund that? Like some of the hard parts about getting something off the ground like this.
Yeah, that is, I mean, when something's unproven or you have something that you believe in tremendously, but you're not quite sure if the general public or the broad market will feel the exact same way. Tequila is a really interesting one, Blaine, because we used to kind of tease each other in the sense that we'd say, hey, everybody has that tequila nightmare, Yeah. And a lot of it was predicated on exactly what I was describing at the top of the show, the kind of gold or white, silver shots of tequila, too many of them with beers and, whatever else. You don't want to smell it. You don't want to think about it. And so part of the fun for me, especially going into, 2000 was, hey, this isn't your father or your grandfather's tequila. This is something completely different. I'm going to bring you back to loving this and being excited about it, because this isn't the, mixto tequila that we came up with that was so prevalent. This is going to be 100% agave, single estate bottled. A glass of Blanco tequila is going to be more complex than cognac by the very nature of the agave's in the ground for 10, 12 years. So imagine the mineral content soaked up to that. You have the highlands, you have the lowlands, you have black volcanic soil versus red clay soil, the sweetness profile versus the herbal profile. There's so much going on with this, and it's so exciting to describe. And so you had two people. You had people that were it was completely new to them, and they were like, wow, this is amazing right away. And then you had those converts that you had to bring back that were like, whoa, I don't want to get too close to that bottle or get that away from me. I was really satisfied for a while bringing those people back, because it was a lot of fun to see them go, oh, I didn't realize, or this is really good. Are you sure this is tequila?
Yeah.
So there was kind of a resurgence of that, where that was a lot of fun for quite a while. But when talking about funding a company or talking about spreading that out to scale, that's where it can get really complicated from the standpoint of you actually need to have that source of funds in order to maintain market growth and in order to make sure that you don't run out of resources. And you certainly can't do that institutionally out of the gate, because you don't have a history. You don't have the ability to say, hey, you can bet on me because you know that this is going to work out unconditionally. You're going to get a return on this. So it's friends and family. It's people that actually believe in you. And I'll say the most important part, or what I have found to be one of the most central elements to investment, is they're investing in the person. Is this person going to give up? Has this person walked away from a number of ventures when it gets hard? Or does this person pick himself up, dust himself off, and say, I'm ready to get punched again? And they want to bet on those people that are willing to carry this all the way through, even as difficult as it is. And so that's really where it starts. And once you're able to get that kind of angel investment, and I might even tranche it, Blaine. I might say, I think more often than not, it's friends and family, and then it becomes angels.
Yeah.
And for me, in the course of my career, what I found to be really vital for my own companies is I look towards institutional investors, people that are in VC firms, people that are very relevant in the CPG space, in the consumer space, that are used to investing large amounts of money into, very proven companies. And I love to say, I'd like to have you invest in this as an individual, not your fund or not your institution, because we're not there yet.
Yeah.
I want you to believe in this early enough that you see this all the way through, and you know that you're adding value just like I'm adding value. And that's been tremendous.
And I'm wondering, like, having grown up in the Valley, See, I grew up in Canada, and when we started our first business, it was all self-funded, all bootstrapped. When we started Dryrun, we bootstrapped, and then we eventually did a little bit of a raise, but very little. And as I got exposed to the valley, just naturally being a tech, at some point you're down there every year talking with people and all of that, and the culture's so different, right? Like and I'm wondering that, yeah, you didn't go in a tech route, but I'm curious, like it felt like you had a very sort of mature idea of how this investment worked anyway. Just how much did that sort of bleed into you? Maybe you just grew up with this, so maybe you don't even sort of recognize it, but like being up in Canada here, we can barely spell investor, like a what? People put money in, like it's such a different culture, right? How much of that do you think sort of seeped in and helped you down the road?
That's a great question. I think that growing up here, to a certain degree, it's innate because you see it your whole life, you to your right and to your left. And I would never say that it's mundane. It's not like, hey, wow, that just happens all the time. But it's certainly something that isn't, to a lot of people that have come here from around the world, they're shocked by the kinds of numbers that are thrown around, the kinds of deals that are made and all these different things. We were kind of classically conditioned to, hey, we're seeing this regularly, and so it can be done. Yeah. The question is, how do you garner enough interest where somebody wants to get that done with you? Mm-hmm. And that's the part that if you grow up here, the illusion may be, oh, this is going to be simple, or I know the right people. Those people are smart, intelligent people, and they vet it to the hilt. And so they want to make sure, like, hey, is this a sound investment, or is this something, are you doing something better than others can do? Mm-hmm. Have you found that niche? And so that process of, hey, I want to really make sure that this is something worthwhile, can be very difficult, especially if it's a misunderstood category. And for a long time, tequila was. Mm-hmm. It was something where kind of I got that side eye look of, you want to do what? Why not just default to something that we're all used to seeing, or that's easier, or a blue ocean versus a red ocean? I mean, I was always one of those people that never wanted to swim in that ocean that everybody else is swimming in. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like you get lost very quickly.
Yeah.
I wanted to do something where everybody gave me that side eye and looked at me and said, okay, really? You're really doing that? Yeah, I'm really doing that. And in time, like everything, I think that I started in a very immature position. I think that I was having fun and learning along the way and making mistakes and all these different things. And then as you evolve and you get more mature and you have some age and wisdom behind you, it's a lot easier to define what needs to be done for that successful business to carry all the way through, and the identifiers. And some of these things that I've learned along the way is you always want to have, probably 3 or 4 points of distinct difference from everybody else.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to do.
No. And partly it's sometimes it's not even easy to recognize. It's like other people outside, your customers can recognize that in you, and sometimes they got to beat you over the head with it. And then you go, oh, okay. Like, that's like, with Dryrun, we've gone through a recent pivot to move up market, and we were pulled up market. It works great for us because it's actually like a better market. But it was just because it's like your customers are the ones that are telling you. Some of them are going like, man, I don't think we need this. And other ones are kicking down your door going, oh my God, we need you guys for this. Like, really?
Yeah.
Are you sure? It's like, yeah. But it's I will say, like, there was a point where there were people almost kicking down our door, and we had in our mind, we were so set on what we believed our market was that we I remember one day we referred to them as outliers. Mm-hmm. And I look back now and I'm like, yeah, and what fortunately it wasn't long. We recognized fairly quickly. I'm like, that mindset could have killed us right there, because we just had this thought of that doesn't fit our narrative. And it turns out they were right, we were wrong. And what that's done to our business is we just have the obsession now with talking with customers, and not just talking with talking with customers, listening to customers and sharing it all among the team and digging in and deep. And we've sort of got this culture now of anyone says anything and everyone's like, oh, what'd they say? That's a culture that a few years ago, it was like, no, that doesn't fit with what I'm thinking.
Right.
So how did you move from, like, I'm just really curious here, because I know even in the intro, I was talking about, like, you won all these spirit competitions and that, it takes a long time to get to that point. But what was your first win when you went, we're on the right track? We haven't won anything yet. Like that, we've won the game, but we got a touchdown here. Like we're in the fight.
Mm-hmm. I'd say that it's the wins came from the industry. You want to feel validated by peers or people that are potentially buying something from you, where they're willing to outlay cash for something you've created.
Yeah.
And I knew we were on the right track from the standpoint of when I would give it to friends and peers and people more consumer based, oh, wow, this is fantastic. And we really like that. But that's not, that vertical that I keep referring to, to get it to a distributor and to get it to key accounts, you need to make sure that those types of people are saying the exact same thing and saying, wow, you really have something here. Mm-hmm. And that takes some fine tuning. You wanted to make sure that you weren't going out with a mediocre offering. And so I've always been taught and conditioned to go much higher end and much more premium, to say, hey, you know what? It's better to stick to these values than it is to compromise, because you may be able to get to a lower price point or a more competitive price point or whatever else. I've always felt like, hey, build something that people can really appreciate, but more than that, build something that people want to share with others and say, hey, have you seen this stuff yet? You should try this out. This is really good.
Yep.
And that's where the pride came in, where it was like, hey, it's like almost like a drug, because you see these people do that, whether it's industry or consumer, and you're like, hey, you feel like you're really onto something, and you take a lot of pride in that. And to your earlier question, as this continued to evolve, I listened to what the industry was telling me. And what was happening is I was going all over the country to educate distributors and large national accounts about tequila, 100% agave tequila, and the differences between tequila and mezcal, and, what expectations are. And really, to a great degree, I think a fascinating facet of this was I was really showing how Blanco tequila, to a great degree in Mexico, is used very much at the time like vodka was used here, as a mixer, as something that is very versatile. I mean, you can sip it, of course, because it is complex, but you could also mix it with anything that you mix vodka with. And that I was just watching people go, what? What are you talking about? And so as I experienced this month over month, the thing that became very apparent to me was the distributors as well as the accounts saying, hey, at the end of the day, what we really want is the ability to make really good cocktails for bars, restaurants, resorts, hotels, clubs, cruise ships. You name it, it's infinite, casinos. But we want to do it with quality and taste, but very quickly. And your presentation was fantastic, but do you realize when you built that cocktail and showed us how to do it, it took 4.5 to 5 minutes? And I said, yeah, I do it all the time. And they said, how do you do that, but in 20 seconds?
Interesting. Yeah.
And I said, if I knew that, I'd be at all my own dinner parties. Every time my wife and I have entertained, I've been behind the bar the entire evening. I missed dinner because people want drinks.
Yep.
And my rationalization was, hey, I'm still talking to everybody because they come back to the bar over and over again. And so I get one-on-one time with them. But she was right. Like, I was kind of missing the dinner because I was squeezing limes. I was blending the agave nectar with water and boiling it off and doing simple syrups and all sorts of stuff to build these nice drinks. And while it was very rewarding to see their reaction to, oh, the tequila is so good, the drinks are so good, everything else, it did stand to reason that as these really intelligent industry people were giving me feedback, they were saying that's not scalable. We can't take your concept and just tell an account, hey, you've got to spend all this time building these drinks. They're going to want to build that, but they're going to want to do it quickly enough where they can turn over. And so that became almost a challenge. And at the time, my wife and I were in Austin, Texas. We had a organic tequila company called Republic. And that was a lot of fun, single estate bottled, 100% agave, certified organic, all the bells and whistles, really great tequila. But I really put a lot of thought into how do we bridge that gap between the tequila and the cocktail as a category. Because there's so much space there. There's so much runway to explore. And Blaine, I got to tell you, here's one of my naive moments. I thought that would be easy. I really did. I thought, hey, I've been doing this a long time. Now I'm well into this. I'll be able to figure this out. And I could in the kitchen. Oh, man, I nailed it in a weekend. I thought, hey, I've got this down. When I tried to take formulas or different cocktails and deconstruct it and say, hey, I'm going to put lightning in a bottle, to titrate that from the kitchen to a production run, the first base formula, the lime formula, like the one that you showed at the top of the show, took me 18 months. Wow. It took 1.5 years, and it's 4 ingredients, but to get the pH right between the acidity and the bricks and the balance when it was up, every time we did a production or a small production, it wasn't where I wanted it to be. I was still like, hey, this isn't right yet. Yeah. Once we got it, it was very rewarding, and we were able to kind of bring it out there, and it got a lot of attention. My wife, being smarter than I am, again, said, hey, you're not going to call this a margarita mix, are you? And I didn't want to say out loud, yes, I am. Of course I am. But her point being that if you're using fresh ingredients, if you're using fresh citrus, lemons, limes, oranges, you're using agave nectar, you're using prickly pear or jalapeno or whatever you're using, why can't you mix that with essentially anything? Mm-hmm. Vodka, rum, gin, tequila, whiskey, champagne for mimosas, beer for micheladas or shandies, even non-out, if you just cut it with water, it's an agua fresca. Sparkling water for a low-cal soft drink because we weren't putting any preservatives in it. And that's when life really kind of took off, like a launching pad, where it was like, hey, there's really something to this. And so we called them spirit blends to give kind of a wide berth there and to say, hey, make it your own. And that is where that really took off. And then, after doing that company, we moved back to California, and she was convinced that I was going to do the 5th tequila brand. And, I got it. She grew up in Guadalajara, and it's a lot like, and you probably have very good Canadian comparisons on this one, but it's a lot like growing up in Napa, and at every dinner, all people want to talk about is wine. Yeah. Yeah. She was kind of over the point of sale material in the garage, and she was kind of over, hey, do we need to talk about this every time we go out with peers? No, we don't. But what are we going to do? And the really rewarding thing for me, Blaine, I think one of the most rewarding things about my career is when I thought about the passion or the build of this whole thing, tequila now has been done. It's been done well. I feel like I've done it relatively well. I kind of get it. But there certainly is a surge where we have a lot of brands right now, and we know not all of them are going to work. Yep. And so I had to ask myself, or I had to look in the mirror and say, does the world need another tequila? My answer is always going to be yes. Just by the way, by default. Like I'm going to still say if it's done well, then absolutely yes. But it's a huge undertaking by any stretch of the imagination. It takes your, heart and soul and life and, all these different things. So she was really smart in the sense that she reminded me, you remember when we did the spirit blends, that was pioneering. That was special. That was something that wasn't being done. That's something that you have a real passion for. And it really is a broad market play. Not everybody's going to drink tequila. No matter what we do or how we advocate, not everybody's going to go, yep. But everybody, regardless of who they are, the application, can probably find one of those flavors that they like or find a practical application for. And that gave you a lot of joy. And I don't even know how much you realize that, but you light up when you talk about it. And so for us, this would have been like 2013, 14. Republic back in Texas, after it was acquired, they had turned the Republic Spirit Blend shelf stable. So they weren't fresh anymore. And she said, you have the opportunity to recreate that, enhance it, do the things that you always wanted to do, or the things that you went, oh, I wish I had thought about that from the start. And we really took our time and we created Fresh Victor.
So it going sort of full circle back, what I find really interesting is a little bit even how I've sort of been talking about our pivot a little bit. It's just, again, you sort of saw opportunity and you started to work towards that opportunity, and then you're learning about that opportunity. And then do you still own these other businesses, or did you kind of exit and sell off these other ones so you can focus here? Or how do you do that now?
Exactly right. I think with anything that you do in this space, you want to have absolute brutal full focus. Like you're all in, because if somebody's going to bet on you as an individual, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as all these different things, they don't want to think that your thoughts are diversified. Like, hey, I'm also looking over my shoulder at how's this doing or how's that doing, or are we competing in that direct space? And regardless of ours being fresh and, others not, or whatever else, you're still competing in the same space. And that's something I learned in the 90s. I had some folks that owned a vodka brand, and I came in with the tequila. And in many ways, I think when I was younger, my stance was, well, we're not really competing against each other because it's the vodka market versus the tequila market. They said, no, it's what somebody's deciding to drink that evening. So it's either mine or yours. Probably not both. Hopefully not both. I mean, that would be, it could create a bad situation. But that was a real learning for me that, hey, you really have to have that tunnel vision to say, I've got a sincere or a fervent desire to succeed, and therefore I'm all in.
Yeah. And the interesting part, like when I looked at this, because no, we don't do a lot of mixed drinks. Like I tend to be either a bit of a Scotch guy, beer of course. I'm a bit of a craft beer nerd, I guess. But when we do have mixed drinks, if you're asking me if this that you have here would compete against the ones that you said like are shelf stable or on the shelf or whatever, honestly, not for me. This competes with the grocery store, because I think what I really appreciate about this is it is fresh. And if I was looking to do a mixed drink, it's kind of a little bit of maybe my mindset or whatever. I would want fresh juice. If I go to a restaurant and I order something, I want fresh ingredients, real ingredients. I don't want what I would view as a cheap mix. And so to me, if I look at that, it would be almost like the cheap tequila bottle with the worm versus $100 bottle of a nice sipping tequila are completely different, right? And I think that's what you've really hit on is like, you would never probably get me ever to walk into a store and buy any sort of mix off the shelf, because I'll be like, well, I'll go to the grocery store and I'll look up a recipe and I'll make it myself. Just like you said, it takes 5 minutes every time. But this is different because, like you said, this is really well done, better than I could do with any ingredients I can get from the grocery store. And also you can do it quick. So I think you've really, you've hit on a niche, and it's from getting that feedback from customers and your own experience where you've got something that's really different. Now, I guess it will compete with those ones, but I wonder how much of it actually just competes with the fresh lime and the other ingredients in the grocery store.
That's the absolute idea, is that you, just like your statement right there, tequila, never a worm, only mezcal. And so that educational facet of, hey, what's the real deal with, because everybody wants to know, right? Like, hey, what's going on with this? And I've watched the United States, America on the whole, learn a ton in the last 25 years. Like I've experienced it. I've had a front row seat to see them trade up and say, hey, look, and then that trade up has become relatively saturated. Okay. Well, we know how to produce tequila. We know what's good and what's not. And, we have a compass now to kind of guide us through, where do we want to head in the space. With the cocktail space or the mocktail space, it's interesting. If you and I we've kind of grew up in the same era. For me, as I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, the only options were the neon green, cloudy, high fructose corn syrup, one, and I'm not going to name any names, but I am going to say it was the usual suspects, and it was not good.
Yeah.
And so those mixes represented ease of use, convenience, right? But the trade-off being that it was 300, 400, 500 calories per drink because it was just sugary, high fructose corn syrup, as opposed to doing things the way your grandparents would have done.
Yeah.
And that's really where I draw a line in the sand and say, hey, it's really important to me with Fresh Victor. The first word in the title is fresh.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a real pain. I mean, believe me, I would not recommend anybody go down this path. You're banging your head against a brick wall because you're dealing not only with distribution and retail, but you're dealing with cold chain. And you're dealing with code dates. So you have a finite amount of time where you're like, hey, you need to use this stuff and it needs to get through the vertical in order to get to you. And then you need to use it. And the saving grace that we really have with our product is it being so high in acidity, it being cold pressed and fresh citrus, it really lends itself to being very stable to a certain degree. And so we do the shelf life studies at UC Davis here, right outside of the Bay Area. And one of the things that we learned, it took a while though. Our first code dates were 42 days from data to production.
Wow, that's
you can't
tight.
get through that distribution process in 42 days and in somebody's hand. And so I got to tell you, Blaine, in the very beginning, we were pouring out maybe more, as much as we were selling. Like it just wasn't enough of a window. And then as we did those studies, we realized pretty quickly, hey, this stuff is, as long as you keep it cold and it's not in the direct sun of Texas or Florida or somewhere like that where it's going to, ferment, it's good for months, which is a real, saving grace. So we can code date it to the point where there's just enough time where you can have it in your fridge and feel comfortable with the amount of time you have to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's because it was one of the things that I looked at is, well, how long does this stuff last? Looking at all this stuff and going, wow, this is great. You can have, like you said, you can have it in the fridge for the day you want it instead of going out and buying it that day. And it feels like it's like this sort of product, because I know my wife and I are a little bit of foodies, right? Like we don't just, drink scotch is like, we're very sort of picky about it. We don't just buy beer. We really like supporting small business when we buy like good craft beer. And then we also support small coffee shops, and it's all and it's like this, it's the thing that attracts me to this is probably the same thing that attracts me to go to the place where they make really good homemade like pizza.
Yeah.
Great stuff. And like it's that group. It's like you just added this other flavor into there now, where it's like, it's almost like the foodie group can now actually make mixed drinks without going to the grocery store and buying all this stuff they have to make themselves, right?
Right. Exactly right. We try to put that quality and fresh positioning into convenience and being able to feel like, hey, I can really proudly serve drinks to my guests to celebrate with, for gatherings, for whatever, and share this kind of quality with ease. Whereas before it felt like daunting. How am I going to create these on point drinks over and over and over again for my guests? Where we want to take that part away, that heavy lift away, and say, we're here for you. We're able to create whatever you want to create. And the best part of this is I can give you tremendous amount of drink recommendations because I do believe that delicious mixers make delicious drinks. But the whiteboard is yours. You can do whatever you want with it. And I have found that people go nuts over finding different combinations.
And I found it was because I was going to ask you about it, but you actually brought it up where Mexican lime and agave, not margarita mix. And I thought that was really interesting. And I think you hit the nail on the head there because when you don't have, it's like, you're not telling me this is what it's used for. It kind of, it sort of opens up the gate to, I could throw this on some other stuff. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head with that one. That was a really interesting observation, I think, from you guys that it can be used for more and let people's imagination kind of run away a little bit with it.
That's the intent. I mean, a very elementary example with the Mexican lime and agave is, of course, if you use tequila or mezcal, it makes a beautiful margarita. Like that's by intent.
Yeah.
But you use rum, perfect daiquiri. You use vodka, use any neutral based spirit with that, and it's fantastic. But man, does it ever pop with sparkling wine or white wine for sangria, or the list goes on and on. And lastly, we cook with it a lot. And you were just talking about being a foodie. I marinate a lot with these. The jalapeno and lime I use for ceviche.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the acidity in the lime juice cooks off the fish. I use the jalapeno or the pineapple and ginger I marinate chicken with and then grill it. It's just really simple to use because these flavors and the profiles really lend themselves to kind of that Epicurean food space.
Okay, give me some ideas. I'm going to give some of that a go. So what is next for you guys? Like where you're at today, what's the next hill that you're eager to climb?
Our business is really trifold as far as on premise. We deal with a lot of the restaurants and casinos and bars and cruise ships and all sorts of cool stuff. And then you have the consumer, kind of the Epicurean grocery market. So the Total Wine and Moors and the, high-end grocery stores that recognize quality, the Whole Foods of the world. And then, the third leg of the stool, which is a really interesting one for me from a learning perspective, because I stayed as far away from it as I could in the tequila business, is direct to consumer, like how we got it to you.
Yeah.
And so I think that in a lot of ways, it's like training at altitude in the tequila business. Yeah. Now I've come down to sea level and I'm not handcuffed by the state by state laws that regulate spirits. This is a non-alcoholic item. And so we actually have a fulfillment center in Northern California, and we can get it anywhere in the country in a couple of days, right to somebody's doorstep.
Yeah.
And so exploring those three categories and, scaling our business, my mission really over the next 3 or 4 years is to find a way to allow people to drink better, or to kind of look at this from the standpoint of, I really do believe that everybody can have this quality of drink consistently.
Ken, this has been really absolutely fascinating and a great conversation. How can people find you in Fresh Victory if they want to talk? Like, obviously, first find your product, but also if they want to chat with you, how do they track you guys down?
Pretty simple. Our website has the information. So freshvictor.com. It has contact information. I'm very accessible. I, go on to the website and answer people directly. Anybody can write in and find me right away within 24 hours, which is fun. A lot of people keep
Yeah.
telling me it's not scalable, and I said, until you prove me wrong, I'm going to keep doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, tell Steve Jobs, because he replied to some, customers here and there.
The best part of what we do, right?
Yeah, and it's the keeping that firsthand touch with customers is just always so critical and so important, right? Well, and I'll make sure that's in the show notes so the people will be able to track you guys down yeah, and I recommend, like I said, usually I'm pretty agnostic with this stuff, but I recommend this is terrific. Like we've got some other flavors in the fridge that we're really looking forward to trying as well, and I may even save a little bit for some marinade or something. Give that a go. But thank you so much, Ken. I really appreciate the time. And for all of you out there, thanks again for watching. Please like, subscribe, follow us. And if you're a fractional CFO or an internal CFO out there and you're looking for ways to keep the management team up to date on your cash flow and save a ton of time you're spending in the spreadsheets, please come and visit us at dryrun.com. We'd love to help you out. Thanks again, Ken.
Thank you.